So hello and welcome everyone to this workshop about coding of medication errors and other product use issues. And welcome again if you have already attended a previous workshop. I'm Carol Ann Wilson and work as a medical officer at the MSSO, and I will be your instructor today. And I'm supported by my colleague Jane Knight, who was speaking to you before. Together we will take you through this webinar, which will last for about 1.5 hours. We would like to make this workshop interactive. Jane mentioned this already, so please submit your questions or send us your comments through the question panel. But just one remark, please do not raise specific coding questions, as we can't help you with individual verbatim terms that you raise, but we will guide you in terms of coding principles. Now let's start with today's topics. You all know that ICH adopted the development of MedDRA in the mid-90s and became the owner of the terminology. ICH then, on contract, appointed the MSSO to take care of the maintenance and further development of the terminology based on user feedback, to provide and organize corresponding training as the one that we have today, and to administer the MedDRA licensees. And all these MSSO activities are overseen by the so-called ICH MedDRA Management Committee. ICH is not only the owner of MedDRA, but also owns this training material. It is protected worldwide. You may use the slides, with the exception of the MedDRA and ICH logos, but will have to clearly indicate that ICH owns the copyright. Also, any adaptations of the slides have to be clearly labeled. And the second bullet point refers to warranty and liability issues you should be aware of. And the last one is not relevant for today because we will not be using any third-party slides. This workshop now nicely complements the webinar provided 1 week ago about the general principles that have to be considered when coding medication errors and other product use errors and issues. I hope that you have attended one of these webinars, the General Principles webinar, because our workshop today builds on what is conveyed in these webinars. So let me provide you with an overview on what we will cover today. We will firstly go through the most important general principles for coding of medication errors that we discussed in detail in the previous webinar. We will then apply these principles in exercises using the verbatims and narratives that you have received beforehand last week. And we will conclude with a question and answer session as mentioned before. But we will address your questions and comments throughout the workshop as well, after each example. The slide explains about the quiz questions, the polling that we will use during the webinar. The easiest way to join these activities is to scan this QR code with your smartphone or tablet, and it will bring you directly to the poll. And as soon as I activate the first question, you'll be able to see it and respond. Or alternatively, you may enter the indicated web address, paulf.com, into the URL bar at the top of your internet browser in your computer, tablet, or cell phone. It will then take you to a log-on screen, and you will be asked for a username. This is the log-on screen. The poll is completely anonymous, so you don't need to enter your name here, but please enter my credentials as the username. That is Carol N. Wills 584. With no spaces, and then click join. You don't have to enter anything else. I just leave this on screen for a moment to allow you to scan the QR code or to enter the required information. Excuse me, but don't get under time pressure because you will be able to see these credentials on each slide that relates to the quizzes. And Jane has put this information in the chat as well. Should you lose connection to the poll during the session, please let us know, and I will again show the QR code in between so that you can scan it. So let's try. Oh, you're already responding. Perfect. Oh, we have all continents. I see the Americas here, I see many of people in India, even Australia. Is it Malaysia or Thailand? I don't know. Philippines, South Korea, China, Russia, US, and many colleagues in Europe. I see Spain, buenos días. Germany, guten Morgen. Is it Turkey or Georgia maybe? Merhaba. So welcome everyone. South Africa is there, Madagascar. So we have global attendance today. Welcome everyone. Let us start with a short recap. As mentioned in part 1 of the medication error coding webinar, the topic medication errors is a critical and important problem in healthcare. Many regulators across the world have a close eye on such occurrences, the contributing factors and related adverse events in patients. They support the recording, coding, reporting, and evaluation of these errors in order to gain new insights into the extent and the causes of medication errors. Of course, with the objective to develop better strategies for their prevention to better protect patient safety. For coding product use errors and problems, the following tips may be helpful. First and foremost, you should be familiar with the MedDRA concept descriptions and the points to consider guidances, so that you know where to find more detailed information, more guidance. So the introductory guide, the companion document, and the MedDRA term selection points to consider document. You should also have good knowledge of the MedDRA structure and hierarchy, particularly in shock injury, poisoning, and procedural complications. Once you have found a potentially appropriate LLT and PT for the reported incident, check if the placement, the hierarchy of the selected LLT and its corresponding PT accurately reflects the reported event. This is one general coding principle for MedDRA coding. It is best to search the MedDRA hierarchy top-down when coding medication errors and other product use concepts, unless you are already very experienced in coding such incidents. And finally, if you can't find a specific term for drugs, vaccines, or medical devices, look out for a product term that would be suitable for your coding task. The following chart can be used to classify medication errors and other product use issues. It visualizes the related decision-making process. I've introduced it in more detail in the General Principles webinar. Here are the 3 core questions that you will have to ask yourself. Did the incident occur intentionally or unintentionally, accidentally? Who caused it? Who triggered it? And was it in the context of therapeutic use or for a therapeutic purpose, yes or no? Let us assume that the unapproved product use took place intentionally. If this is decided by a healthcare professional and for therapeutic purposes, we classify these events as off-label use. If this originates from the patient or consumer and happens in the therapeutic setting, we classify this as intentional product misuse. If the deviation does not occur in the context of therapeutic use of the product, the deviation is classified as drug abuse or drug addiction dependence. If the unapproved product use is unintentional, accidental, this can also be caused by both the healthcare professional or patient consumer. This always occurs in the context of therapeutic use of the relevant product and is classified as medication or product use error. But often, case information does not allow for any of these classifications. What can be done when getting similar reports for coding purposes then? For these scenarios, the flowchart must be expanded with 2 neutral terms. See the question marks here. If it cannot be clarified whether an intentional deviation from the label by the patient happens for therapeutic reasons or not, an appropriate LLT under PT intentional product use issue should be assigned. And if it cannot be clarified whether such unapproved use occurred by mistake or intentionally, an appropriate LLT under PT product use issue should be assigned. So these are the more vague terms that you can use, and the LLT underneath, of course, that you can use if you are confronted with such coding scenarios. Please also remember the definition of the term medication error when working on our exercises. A medication error is any preventable event that may result in the improper use of medication or harm to the patient while the medication is under the control of those involved in the medication process, meaning physicians, pharmacists, nurses, patients, consumers, or their family members. The second aspect that is highlighted in green is really important to remember. These errors occur during product use in the medication process, when the product is under the control of the healthcare provider, patient, or consumer. The term does not refer to errors that occur during manufacturing or are caused by wholesalers or other external parties or factors, which are outside of the control of the healthcare provider, patient, or consumer. Medication and other product use errors may be related to professional practice, the products themselves, healthcare processes and systems, including prescribing, communication of orders, product labeling, product packaging and nomenclature, preparation of products and their dispensing, distribution and administration, as well as related education and product monitoring. Here, one last hint. Before searching for suitable terms for one of these coding scenarios, you should always first assess the reported information, the verbatim. First, check for the three criteria, the basic criteria for classification that we already saw in the decision chart. Did the incident occur intentionally or accidentally? Who has caused it? Who triggered it? And was there therapeutic purpose, yes or no? Then check at which stage the error occurred and whether it led to subsequent errors and even harm in the patient, because then you may have to split code. If contributing factors are reported, they need to be captured in addition. Or was a report referring to circumstances that only could lead to a medication error, but no error occurred yet? Or was an error made but subsequently intercepted from reaching the patient? This can also be captured with MedDRA terms. Because the type of report, the type of information that you get will influence the way you search for appropriate terms. The exact understanding of the reported information will help you find the most suitable LLT or LLTs, the closest matches. It will make your search more efficient and also more targeted. Are there any questions so far, Jane?
No questions, Caroline. Everything's clear.
Okay, so this was just a short recap. And now let's apply these principles and work on our exercises. Please use a MedDRA browser and try to find the best LLT or LLTs to code the verbatims, which we have sent to you last week before the workshop. Do your searches either top-down or bottom-up to find the most specific LLT or LLTs, and we will use Poll Everywhere for the submission of your proposals. And we will review and discuss the correct assignment for each verbatim, and then discuss it after coming to a final result. Address all your questions. Here the information how to access the web-based browser. Please note that this is a temporary demonstration password only that will expire in a few days from now, but you can of course also use your company-specific credentials or your company-specific browser. Jane has also put this information in the chat. So I hope that you have all access to the browser or one browser now, and Then let's start. Here's our first example. It is reported that a patient had cold symptoms 9 days before the visit and decided to discontinue all his prescription drugs, suspecting an RDR, an adverse drug reaction. And this is actually verbatim that was submitted for consideration by a previous attendee. So when looking at this verbatim, ask yourself the usual questions. Was it accidental or intentional? Can we say this? Who has caused the incident? Was it in the context of therapeutic use? At which stage in the medication practice did the incident occur? Do we have to split code? And was there a root cause, a cause that needs to be captured for the incident? And was the medication error intercepted, or was the report referring to a potential occurrence of the medication error? And based on what you can see here, these are the questions that we can answer. So the last bullet point is not relevant here. Now, how would you approach this verbatim? Patient had cold symptoms 9 days before the visit and decided to discontinue all his prescription drugs, suspecting an adverse drug reaction. Therapy cessation by patient, therapy interrupted, drug administration duration too short, drug administration interrupted, drug dose omission, intentional misuse in product use duration, and or cold symptoms, all LLTs. How would you approach this verbatim? Would you split code? Would you just only assign one code here? What would you do? I see more than 110 answer already. Let's see what you are going for. Most of you are going therapy cessation by patient. Some of you also therapy interrupted, intentional misuse in product use duration, and cold symptoms. These are the preferred options that you're voting for. Let me close the poll here. And here we are. And let us use our decision chart first to see how to best classify the reported incident. We know it was a conscious decision. It was an intentional deviation from the prescribed dosing regimen. It was made by the patient. It was somehow in the context of therapeutic use of the drug. These were prescription drugs. But does this incident truly represent an intentional drug misuse? In my view, rather not. Because if you look at into the companion document, you will see why. The document really provides clarity about similar scenarios and states that it may depend on the reason or cause whether a given verbatim represents an error or not. And it goes on and states that the occurrence of an adverse drug reaction may cause the patient to stop therapy, and that this is not intentional misuse or an error. This therapy cessation due to an adverse drug reaction is usually captured elsewhere in a separate database field in the database, and only the adverse drug reaction is coded, or in this instance, in our case, the suspected adverse drug reaction is coded in the case. So let me switch to the browser in order to show you it kicked me out, so let me log in again. Here I am. So let us look at the proposed LLTs. The potential adverse drug reaction has to be captured by assigning, let us look for cold and symptom. Here we are, and search. And of course, we find a perfect match, cold symptoms here. And if I click on the plus sign, you see it's grouped under PT nasopharyngitis. So this would capture the adverse drug reaction, the suspected adverse drug reaction. This has caused the decision of the patient. Based on the PTC guidance, assignment of therapy cessation by patient. Let us look for this one. Oops. And cessation. And search. Here we are, therapy cessation by patient. If I click on it and say go to browser, you see that this LLT and PT is grouped in SOC surgical and medical procedures. It's considered a medical procedure. And also therapy interrupted, here it is. This was also an option, therapy interrupted, is also grouped in the same SOC under the same HLT. Assignment of these LLTs would not be appropriate because the intentional discontinuation of therapy by the patient was due to a suspected RDR. And this interruption or suspension of the therapy is captured in a separate database field. We do not have to capture it with MedDRA. Drug administration duration too short was another option. You can just enter word stems. Here it is, drug administration duration too short. Go to browser again, and you can see the LLT in the hierarchy. It is grouped under HLT product administration errors and issues, and under PT incorrect product administration duration. So also the therapy drug administration interrupted and drug dose omission, all these are vague terms representing product use issues. They would be used when it is not clear whether an incident occurred accidentally or intentionally. In our case, we know that the patient took a conscious decision to stop his medication. So let me look for drug administration interrupted. Here it is. This was another option here, drug administration interrupted. And you see that this LLT rather refers not to a complete treatment, but just to one dose administration, single dose administration. Also, infusion administration interrupted is grouped under this PT. That's why it's always important to check the hierarchy and also the siblings, the neighbors of a seemingly suitable LLT for your coding purposes. So this would not be appropriate. It means something different. And drug dose, product dose omission. Here we have the product dose omission in error or product dose omission issue. Again, the patient took a conscious decision to stop the therapy. That's why any PT under this HLT, product administration errors and issues, would not be suitable. Now let us look under the HLT that groups. Here we have the HLGT off-label uses and intentional product misuses, use issues. Here we have the intentional product misuses. Intentional misuse in product use duration was an option. Let us look under PT intentional drug misuse. Here it is, intentional misuse in product use duration. It includes the information intentional, but it's not appropriate for our scenario either, based on the PTC guidance. The patient took this decision based on a suspected RDR, and in such instances, only the specific RDR needs to be coded with MedDRA. So here we are. Back again. We would just code the suspected RDR with LLT cold symptoms under PT nasopharyngitis. So this does not represent any issue the interruption of the treatment due to the suspected RDR is captured in a separate database field. That's why assignment of this single LLT would be sufficient. No split coding is necessary in this instance. Are there any questions?
Yes, there's one question, Caroline. Laura's asking, what if in this situation it was a decreased dose? If the patient just decreased his dose because of ADRs by taking the decision himself, what would you code it to then?
When you took the decision because of an RDR, it would be the same, because you would, I don't know how your case report form or your pharmacovigilance database looks like, whether you have a separate database field for signaling the dose reduction or the adaptation of the dose. If this is not a case, you would capture it with MedDRA. It really depends on the setup of your database. If you cannot capture it with a separate database field, you would consider this an intentional dose decrease, or yeah, that's what you would do.
Thank you.
So there is no. It really depends on your database. Any more questions,
No,
Jane?
that's all, Caroline. That's all. Thank you.
Next one. Here it is reported that the patient had no access to community-based opioid maintenance program for 2 weeks because these institutions were closed due to the pandemic and suffered withdrawal symptoms during that period, during these 2 weeks. This is actually another verbatim submitted by a previous attendee. So here's our verbatim. So all listed aspects can be answered when looking at our verbatim, with the exception of the last bullet point. Now, how would you approach this one? Patient had no access to community-based opioid maintenance program for 2 weeks because these institutions were closed and suffered withdrawal symptoms during that period. Product unavailable due to pandemic, drug supply chain interruption due to pandemic, temporary interruption of therapy, inappropriate product tapering, drug administration interrupted, opiate withdrawal symptoms, drug withdrawal syndrome. These are the options. I already see more than 130 answers, 140. So let's have a look. Opiate withdrawal symptoms is the preferred option, yes. Then we have product unavailable due to pandemic or drug supply chain interruption due to pandemic, split of opinions here, and others also vote for temporary interruption of therapy. Okay, let me close the poll and use our decision chart first to roughly classify this incident. So we cannot say whether this occurred accidentally or intentionally. Was it triggered by the patient? Rather not. It was caused by external factors. So the institutions were closed. And therefore, it does not represent a product use issue, again, because it was not under the control of the patient. It was not under the control. So he just missed his opioid maintenance therapy for 2 weeks because of reasons that were out of his or her control. Remember the definition of the term medication error again. Any preventable event that may result in the improper use of medication or harm to the patient while the medication is under the control of those involved in the medication process. And in our example, the patient had no access to the community-based opioid maintenance program for 2 weeks because the institutions were closed due to the pandemic. So this was not under the patient's control. That is why the incident cannot be classified as medication error or issue. So again, let me switch to my browser here. So we had the product unavailable due to pandemic. Product unavailable. And let me search. Here it is, product unavailable due to pandemic. If I go to the browser again, we see it's grouped under sub-product issues. Here we are, HLT, product supply and availability issues, product unavailable due to pandemic. And the product supply issues are grouped under the same HLT here. You see drug supply chain interruption due to pandemic. This was the other option that we had in our poll. And we had a split of opinions what to assign here. And this shows somehow the granularity of MedDRA also in the area of product quality issues. Here, we really have to differentiate between supply and availability issues. What's the difference between these two? Supply issues refer to problems on the part of the manufacturer when the quantity of a particular drug produced does not meet the demand for whatever reason. Product availability issues relate to scenarios where a sufficient quantity of a particular drug is available on the market, but as an example, a pharmacy runs out of this medication and it takes a few days to receive a new supply. In our case, no interruption of the drug supply chain was reported. The product was unavailable because the institutions for the opioid maintenance program were closed for 2 weeks. So it was an availability issue, not a supply issue. So product unavailable due to pandemic would be the correct code assignment here for the reason of the interruption of the therapy. Temporary interruption of therapy here it is. Again, if this is considered, you will find it in surgical and medical procedures, and it's grouped under therapy interrupted. Would capture this LLT would capture the fact that the availability issue led to a temporary interruption of the patient's therapy. Inappropriate product tapering. Let us look for this one. This was also an option. Yeah. Here we are. Right mouse click, go to browser. It's grouped under inappropriate schedule of product discontinuation. This describes a different scenario. Tapering is a process of slowly decreasing the amount of drug being taken over time, helping to adjust to the loss of drug over time, and thereby decreasing the severity of cravings and withdrawal syndrome. So this was not reported here. Drug administration interrupted. We had this before. Product administration interrupted. We saw this before. This rather relates to a single dose administration, as mentioned before. So here again, important to check the hierarchy of suitable, so-called suitable LLTs based on the wording. It seems to be suitable, but when looking at the hierarchy, it's not. And then, of course, we will have to code the adverse events in the patient as well. We have the withdrawal symptoms. If I click on this one, go to browser, you see it's in general disorders and in secondary linked to psychiatric disorders. Let us look into it in its primary SOC. Here we are. Withdrawal reaction, withdrawal syndrome. So this is a more vague term. We have the information that it's the opioid maintenance therapy it's opioid withdrawal syndromes. And then we can check whether we find a more specific term. Here it is. It's not opioids, but it's opiates. And if I go to the browser, you see that this is now grouped under drug withdrawal syndrome. Here, now it's taking it. Drug withdrawal syndrome, different PT that the one we saw before. And here's the opiate withdrawal syndromes. And you see cannabis withdrawal as well, etc. So this looks good, but the question is whether we can exchange opioids with opiates. If yes, this would be the closest match for the adverse reaction in the patient. If both terms cannot be considered quasi-synonyms, then we would just select drug withdrawal syndrome. So in order to capture the fact that it's a drug withdrawal, because we saw that withdrawal syndrome, there's one very unspecific PT as well, but we are talking about a drug withdrawal syndrome. So here we will have to decide whether we can consider this an opiate withdrawal syndrome. Let me switch back again to my presentation. Here we are. In the companion document, you'll find additional examples showing the difference between supply and availability problems. In the first example, a patient was told by her pharmacist that her medication was not available due to a shortage in supply following closure of several manufacturing facilities. So this is definitely a supply issue by the manufacturer. Whereas here, the pharmacist informed the patient that his medication was not available due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So maybe the delivery was lost or whatsoever. Then you would, of course, code to product unavailable due to the pandemic. And we still have the open question whether we can exchange opioids with opiates. In Dorlans, you'll find two definitions, and the second one here states that more broadly, an opioid is any compound with opiate-like activity, including the opiates. So meaning that we can consider both as quasi-synonyms. And Dorlans is always a primary reference for MedDRA classification. So with this, here the finally suggested code assignments. We would code to product unavailable due to pandemic under PT product availability issue, and we would code to the temporary interruption of therapy. It was for 2 weeks under therapy interrupted, and of course also capture the withdrawal symptoms of the patients with the LLT opiate withdrawal symptoms under PT drug withdrawal syndrome. Are there questions or comments, Jane?
No, Caroline, no. No, there's no comments or questions on this one.
Thank you. Next one. Here, a patient suddenly stopped the drug intake for 5 days before hospitalization as he had lost the prescribed medication and couldn't afford to buy a new package. Again, a proposed verbatim from a previous attendee. Look at the verbatim to understand what has to be captured. And here, all aspects have to be considered with the exception of the last two bullet points. With the last bullet point, actually. Patient suddenly stopped the drug intake for 5 days before hospitalization as he had lost the prescribed medication and couldn't afford to buy a new package. Which LLT or LLTs would you select here for this verbatim? Product availability issue, unable to afford prescribed medication, insurance issue, distractibility, therapy interrupted, treatment non-compliance. I see that more than 110, 120 answers already. Product availability issue, unable to afford prescribed medication. Yeah, this seems to be very suitable in this instance. Insurance issue, distractibility, therapy interrupted, treatment non-compliance. So most of you are voting for unable to afford prescribed medication and therapy interrupted. But some of you also vote for product availability issue and treatment non-compliance. So let me close the poll. Here we are. And use our decision chart first. So here we are. This was accidentally. This happened accidentally. The patient has lost his medication. It was a patient, but it was not for therapeutic intention. So we cannot consider this a medication error or issue. It was not under the control of the patient. Again, remember the definition of medication error. Here, it was not under the control of the patient or consumer. The patient has lost his prescribed medication, and this does not represent a medication error or issue. Let me switch to my browser again. So we would, of course, try to capture the external factors which cause the interruption of therapy. In our example, patient has lost his medication. So we could look for something similar. Loss, for instance, nothing, or lost. No, nothing. So this is really out of scope of the terminology. You wouldn't find anything like this in the terminology. Product availability issue, we saw this LLT before. It's grouped under SOC product issues. So this scenario does not represent a product availability issue because the drug is available, but the patient is unable to purchase the medication from the pharmacy because he cannot afford it. So if you look for afford and medication, you find inability to afford medication or unable to afford prescribed medication. Here we are, go to browser. Here we have the unable to afford prescribed medication or inability to afford medication. So these are the terms that we can, this LLT, unable to afford prescribed medication, would perfectly capture what has been reported in our case. Insurance issue, you see it's underneath. So the unable to afford prescribed medication is grouped in social circumstances under economic circumstances, and the same holds true for the insurance issue. Selecting insurance issue would be an addition of information. All we know is that the patient couldn't afford to buy a new pack of the drug he lost. And so we would add information and remember the basic MedDRA coding rule, code as reported. So we shouldn't add any or interpret anything into what has been reported. Distractibility, same problem. This would be distractibility could have led to the fact that the patient lost his medication, but this was not reported. It's of course available in MedDRA under psychiatric disorders, but again, it would be an interpretation, addition of information to what has been reported. Therapy interrupted. We saw that before. Here we are, therapy interrupted. Go to browser. Would capture the fact that the treatment was interrupted due to financial problems of the patient. So again, under SOC, surgical and medical procedures. And the other option some of you voted for was treatment non-compliance. So treatment non-compliance is always caused by the patient consumer, and this aspect would be met in our case. But non-compliance refers to a habitual non-adherence with a therapeutic plan, not to single isolated events. So it would be a habitual non-adherence, should occur more often. And it can result from a variety of factors. Can be a result of a medication error, but also an intentional deviation. So this is not appropriate here. The PTC companion document provides guidance how to handle similar scenarios when addressing dose omissions. Dose omissions due to non-clinical or external factors like supply, insurance, financial issues should be classified as a therapy interruption, not as a medication error or product use issue. And therefore here the finally suggested code assignment, we would code to unable to afford prescribed medication under inability to afford medication, and then also capture the fact that due to this inability to afford the medication, the therapy was interrupted. Any questions, Jane?
No,
other question?
No, Caroline. No, Caroline. No questions on this one.
Hope this was clear then. Then the next one. Patient abruptly discontinued his medication instead of gradually decreasing the total daily dose. The usual questions. What can we answer when looking at this verbatim? So we can answer the first 5 questions, but the last 2 bullet points are not relevant, cannot be answered with what we have reported here. Your turn again. Patient abruptly discontinued his medication instead of gradually decreasing the total daily dose. Lack of drug titration, drug use less than labeled administration duration, failure to suspend medication, inappropriate schedule of product discontinuation, drug administration duration too short, intentional misuse in product use duration, or intentional use less than recommended duration. How would you approach this one? Patient has suddenly discontinued his medication instead of gradually decreasing the total daily dose. Yes, again, I see 110 of you have already voted. Let's see. Most of you are voting for inappropriate schedule of product discontinuation, but others also lack of drug titration, drug use less than labeled duration, or intentional misuse in product use duration. Let me close the poll. And first, again, use our decision chart. The verbatim doesn't tell us whether this patient discontinued his medication in error or consciously, intentionally. So we have to classify this incident as product use issue. That's the first decision that we have to take. And if we look into the browser again, Then we have, of course, the lack and titration. This is, of course, available in MedDRA. Here it is. Go to browser. Under product administration errors and issues and SOC injury, poisoning and procedural complications. But this is exactly the opposite. It describes exactly the opposite of what was reported in our case. In titration, the medication is started at a low dose and then gradually raised. In our case, the discontinuation of the drug was handled inappropriately. Drug use less than labeled administration duration. Drug administration less than labeled administration duration. Here it is. Go to browser. Again, under medication errors, it's under SOC injury, but under a different HLT, medication errors, product use errors, and issues. So this does not capture drug use less than the labeled administration duration. This is refers to a scenario when the recommended or labeled dosing duration was too short, and the same holds true for drug administration duration, too short. This LLT includes the information that the drug was administered. It is more specific, but both are not suitable for capturing our reported incidents. So the duration, let me check the drug administration duration too short. Here it is. Go to browser. So you see this one is grouped under administration errors. And we know that this drug was administered. So this HLT would be appropriate. But drug administration duration too short is again is not capturing our reported incidents specifically. Failure to suspend medication would be used when one should stop the administration of a medication but continues its intake. So this would also be inappropriate. Now, what about inappropriate schedule of product discontinuation? Here it is. Inappropriate schedule of product discontinuation. Here it is. Inappropriate schedule. It's also under product administration errors and issues. So this seems to be suitable. This exactly captured the reported incident and is grouped under the same PT. You'll find LLT inappropriate product tapering under this PT as well. But LLT inappropriate product tapering would only be assigned if a patient, for instance, discontinues the medication over 3 days instead of 1 week. In our case, the patient missed the tapering completely and he discontinued his medication suddenly. So an intentional misuse in product use duration and intentional use less than recommended duration would both not fit because our verbatim doesn't tell whether the inappropriate discontinuation of the drug happened intentionally or accidentally. So these would be grouped under this HLT, off-label uses, intentional product misuses. Under intentional product misuse, you would find intentional misuse in product used duration, and the other intentional product use issue. Here you find the intentional use beyond less than recommended duration. This was the other option, but our verbatim doesn't tell that this was intentional. So both would not be suitable for our verbatim. Oops. Here we are. Here's the finally suggested code assignment. We would code to inappropriate schedule of product discontinuation under the same PT. So you see, MedDRA is very granular in the area of medication errors and issues, and that's why it's very important to really look at the verbatim first, but also thoroughly review the options that you have in MedDRA and decide based on the verbatim what would be the closest match to what has been reported. Any questions, Jane?
Yes, there's one. Can you just explain? There's a question about why have we chosen a term where the HLGT says medication errors? Could you just go back and show that it's not just medication errors in the HLGT, please?
Here we have the inappropriate schedule of product discontinuation, and you see that the HLT says product administration errors and issues. So it includes both errors and issues. So vague terms that can be used when it's not clear whether something was an error or intentional. So this keeps it vague. The issues just means problems. Product administration problems.
That's perfect. Thank you, Caroline. Well, I've got another one. Why can we not have a lot more granular LLTs addressing specific product uses, product issues? Wow.
Well, you can have more. If MedDRA is already very granular, and you saw it when looking at the options that you had in the polls. So you really have to be very clear about the meaning of the different LLTs in order to select the correct LLT for the given verbatim. But of course, if you find something that is not available in MedDRA yet, not even a good approximation to what you have reported, then you can always submit a change request to the MSSO in order to get a better term.
Thank you, Caroline. Yes, if it's a different concept, but we can't have a term for every possible verbatim, can we? Thank you.
No.
Thank you.
It really depends on the wording. Then you need to look for the best approximation to what has been reported in your verbatim.
No other questions at the moment, Caroline. Thank you.
Okay, then the next one. Next, it is reported that someone was taking 20 laxative tablets a day to lose weight. And the person did it for a purpose, so it was intentional. It was a patient or consumer, and it was not in the context of therapeutic use. It was taken for a different indication than obstipation, and also too many tablets were taken per day. We know the stage where the incident occurred and have to ask ourselves whether split coding will be necessary here. And there's no information that relates to the last two bullet points. So how would you approach this one? Taking 20 laxative tablets a day to lose weight. Intentional drug misuse, drug abuse, drug dependence, intentional deviation from dosage regimen, overdose, intentional overdose, weight loss. I see that more than 120 of you have already responded here. Intentional drug misuse is the favorite. Drug abuse, followed by drug abuse and intentional overdose. Weight loss, 5%. Intentional deviation from dosage regimen. Drug dependence, no one. So we have a split of opinions here. So let me close the poll. And again, look at our decision chart. So here we know this was intentional. It was for a purpose, taking 20 laxative tablets a day to lose weight. It was an intentional decision aiming for losing weight. It was decided by the patient. And was it for a therapeutic intention? No, it wasn't. because it was a deviation from the indication obstipation in the instance of laxative tablets. So it was a drug abuse or dependence. So a dependence was not reported here. So in this instance, classification would be drug abuse. So this would be the rough classification of what has been reported here, drug abuse. It's not a misuse. It's not in the framework of therapeutic use of the laxative tablets, because it was not taken for obstipation. It was taken for a different purpose. So let me again look for the proposed LLT assignments. One was the intentional drug misuse. It's not an intentional drug misuse, because intentional drug misuse one aspect of the intentional drug misuse is that it is in the framework of therapeutic use of a given drug, and this is not the case in this instance. Drug abuse, you will see that this is grouped under another SOC. Here we are, drug abuse. Go to browser, and we see it's grouped under psychiatric disorders, drug abuse. So all the abuse PTs and addiction PTs can be found in HLT, substance-related and addictive disorders under psychiatric disorders. So the drug abuse, yes, this was the reported scenario. This represents a drug abuse. Here we are, and we find here the laxative abuse. So a very specific term that we can use in order to code the reported scenario. We have now classified the incident, but we'll have to capture the specifics in addition. Intentional use for unlabeled indication was one aspect. It was not in the fall, but this could be considered. If I click on it and say go to browser, then you find it here, intentional use for unlabeled indication, and here you will also find the intentional deviation from dosage regimen. So both of them are grouped under intentional product use issue. So we know it was intentional. We classify first that it was a drug abuse, and then we want to, in addition, capture the specifics of the abuse. And this we can do with intentional deviation from dosage regimen, because the patient or the person took 20 tablets a day, so much too much, and intention and for an unlabeled indication in this instance. Well, what we have to ask ourselves, and some of you have voted for the intentional overdose, is this just a deviation from the dosage regimen, or can we consider this an overdose? My preference would also be to classify as overdose. And here, sometimes the concept descriptions are really helpful. Concept descriptions are not medical definitions, but describe how certain concepts are classified in MedDRA. So if I click on O here, then I will be brought to overdose. For the purposes of term selection and analysis of MedDRA-coded data, overdose is more than the maximum recommended dose in quantity and or concentration. In other words, an excessive dose. So this would be met with our verbatim, because the patient is taking 20 tablets. So it's hard to believe that the patient takes 1 tablet each hour, even at nighttime. So he or she will rather take 5 or 10 tablets 4 or 2 times a day. And this would represent an overdose, an excessive dose each time. But you may also be more conservative and rather select intentional deviation from dosage regimen and not assume an intentional overdose. And we would, of course, also code the indication for use in this instance. it would be the weight loss. And this is a loss of weight. Here we are, weight loss. Go to browser. Here we are. This would be the indication for use. Let me switch back. And here the final proposals. We would code to laxative abuse under PT drug abuse. We would either code to intentional use for unlabeled indication under intentional product use issue, or intentional deviation from dosage regimen under the same PT. So here you have to make a decision. And what I would try to code as specifically, and you have to make the decision whether you would take it as a dosage or indication issue. Intentional overdose was an option. I would rather go for this intentional overdose, but you may be more conservative. It really depends on your processes as well. If you code in the case and you have the information how these doses were taken. So if the 20 tablets were taken in a few doses, then you could consider this as overdose. If you're coding out of context, you may be more conservative and not go for the intentional overdose, but rather keep it with intentional deviation from dosage regimen. And last but not least, we would also code the indication for use, the unlabeled indication, weight loss. Any questions or comments, Jane, for this one?
Yes, I think it's, so we've got a couple of comments. One, are we not assuming weight loss here?
No, it's the purpose of taking. It would be entered as indication for use in pharmacovigilance for the suspect drug, the laxative.
And intentional overdose wouldn't cover the deviation from the dosage regime. So I think it's saying that if you covered an intentional overdose, you're automatically assuming the dose change.
Well, the dose, the patient is taking 20 laxative tablets a day, the consumer. So this is definitely too much. That's why we can assume that it's too much. The question is whether we can consider it as an overdose, as just explained. But in my view, taking 20 tablets will lead to overdoses for each single dose. Because the patient will not take the 20 tablets in 1 hour, every 1 hour, maybe.
So you would select both of them, the deviation from dosage and the intentional overdose. If you selected the overdose, you'd still have the one above, would you?
Yes.
You would.
This one, if you would code the intentional overdose, you have the dose issue. Then I would go for the intentional use for unlabeled indication, because of course the indication is also unlabeled because laxatives are given for obstipation. So and the patient then decides to take it for losing weight, and that's why it's an unlabeled indication. If you are more conservative and would not go for the intentional overdose, then you have to decide whether you would select intentional use for unlabeled indication or intentional deviation from dosage regimen. You could also decide to just only assign intentional product use issue, because this is the PT where both of these LLTs are grouped underneath. But I would go for the more detailed information here and either assign the dosage regimen or the unlabeled indication. I would rather go, yeah.
So that answers the last question Laura's just raised. Hopefully that answers your comment there, Laura. So that's everything, Caroline, for now. You can
okay
on. Thank you.
So next one. Here, a nurse administered 1 dose of the regular antiarrhythmic medication several hours earlier than instructed. Patient was found to have severe QTc prolongation on his ECG. Again, we will have first closely look at the verbatim to better understand the report and what has to be captured for this coding scenario. And here we are. This is what needs to be considered when looking for suitable LLTs. Now, again, make your choices. Nurse administered 1 dose of the regular antiarrhythmic medication several hours earlier than instructed. Patient was found to have severe QTc prolongation on his ECG. What needs to be captured here? It's a chain of events, so split coding would be necessary here in order to capture the full information. I see that more than 110 of you have already voted. Let us look for what you're going for. Split of opinions, drug dose administration interval too short is the preferred one for the medication issue, for the administration issue. And then, of course, electrocardiogram QTc interval prolonged is the preferred selection for the second part, for the adverse event and the resulting adverse event in the patient. And some of you would also go for drug dose omission in error. Okay, so let me close this poll again and first look at our decision chart here. Is it clear from the verbatim whether the incident occurred intentionally or accidentally? It's not. At first sight, it seems to be a medication error, but it could well be that the nurse made a conscious decision to administer the antiarrhythmic drug earlier. Maybe the patient was scheduled for surgery in the afternoon and it was brought forward. The administration or the surgery was brought forward to the morning, and she wanted to make sure that the patient receives his daily dose and decided to administer it earlier. So we don't know. This is why I would classify this incident as a product use issue. So I would look for a neutral term for coding this incident. And when looking at the codes again, wrong dose is a direct match because there are some very go to browser. You see that these are grouped under medication errors, product use errors, and issues, wrong dose, wrong drug, wrong patient. So these LLTs can be selected in addition to other LLTs in order to capture the full information of what has been reported in all occasions where you don't find a suitable combination term. So this would be an option, wrong dose. You see wrong schedule here. Then we had drug use for unapproved schedule. Here it is. It is grouped under product use issue. So this does not capture the stage, does not capture the fact that the drug was finally administered. Drug dose administration interval too short. We would look into the product administration errors and issues. Rate, schedule. Many terms here. I will have to look for it. Interval too short. Here it is, go to browser, inappropriate schedule of product administration. Here we are. This LLT, so to say, is a neutral term because it does not contain the information that the deviation from the prescribed schedule occurred in error. It could represent both an unspecified product administration issue or a product administration error. So this would also be considered a neutral term that you could use for coding an issue or an error. Intentional deviation from dosage regimen, well, we don't know. We would again have to look into the off-label uses, intentional product misuses, and use issues. Here we are, intentional product use issue. Intentional deviation from dosage regimen is the one. We don't know whether the deviation from the administration schedule was intentional. And drug dose omission and error, no, because the dose was not omitted. It was given too early. So this would not be appropriate either. We would, of course, need to capture the clinical consequences as well. So if I go for QT interval, here we are. And here you see that we have one for the QTC interval prolonged. Here we are. So always code as specifically as possible. Here we have the QTC interval prolonged. We also have the QT prolonged, but here we have additional information. It's a corrected QT interval that is prolonged, and this is medically relevant to capture. So always code as specifically as possible when looking at the LLTs. This would be the correct LLT to select, and most of you have voted for this one. So here we are. We would go for LLT drug dose administration interval to short under inappropriate schedule of product administration. And we would also, of course, code the adverse event in the patient, the electrocardiogram QTC interval prolonged under electrocardiogram QT prolonged. So split coding would be necessary here because we have a chain of events. First of all, an administration issue triggered by the nurse, and then a resulting adverse reaction in the patient. Any questions?
Why isn't it correct? Yes. Why isn't it correct to code premature start of scheduled drug administration in this case?
It is not a start of the medication. It's a regular administration of an antiarrhythmic medication. And one of these doses is given too early. So it's not a start of the medication. It's in the middle of the treatment that one dose was provided too early. You see, regular antiarrhythmic medication. Perfect. One dose of the regular antiarrhythmic medication was given too early.
Yes, it's not the first dose, is it? It's
not the first.
I understand. Thank you very much, Caroline. That's everything there.
Okay. Next one. In our next example, it is reported that the doctor didn't ask if his patient was allergic to penicillin and prescribed penicillin despite documented previous allergic reactions. Again, the usual questions. And here, again, we can answer the first 5. The 2 last ones are not relevant, cannot be answered with are not addressed in our verbatim. Your turn again. Doctor didn't ask if he was allergic to penicillin and prescribed penicillin despite documented previous allergic reactions. Would you code to circumstance or information capable of leading to medication errors? Wrong patient received medication, wrong drug prescribed, contraindicated drug prescribed, contraindicated drug administered, documented allergy to administered drug, or medication monitoring error. What would you do? You see 120 responses already, so let's have a look. Some of you are going for circumstance or information capable of leading to medication error. Majority is voting for contraindicated drug prescribed. Some are also voting for documented allergy to administered drug. Okay, thank you for joining again. And let me close the poll and first classify our event with our decision chart. We know that this happened accidentally. The physician wouldn't put his patient at risk intentionally, so this would be then a criminal act. So it wasn't accidental. He didn't ask, he just forgot. It was caused by the physician, and it was in the context of therapeutic use. So here we're looking at a medication error. And when I again switch to the browser, then let me show first the circumstance. PTs, circumstance or information capable of leading to device use error or leading to medication error, two separate PTs in this instance. So this was not a potential medication error that was reported. A medication error actually occurred. Therefore, this would not be appropriate. So these PTs are used in order to signal the potential for a medication error. For instance, when you have similar drug names or similar packaging that could be confused, so that a wrong drug is given to the patient, then you would select this circumstance or information capable of leading to medication error. But it would not be suitable in our case because here we know that the medication error occurred. Wrong patient received medication. Here it is. So again, it would of course be under product administration errors and issues. Here, wrong patient received product. This would rather be used when the medicine was supposed to be given to one patient, but another patient received it. So this was not reported here. Wrong drug prescribed. This would be a prescribing error. Product prescribing error. Here it is, wrong drug prescribed. This seems to fit the case. This patient should not have received a prescription for penicillin because of his medical history. But we have an even more specific LLT that is, here it is, contraindicated drug prescribed. A known penicillin hypersensitivity represents a contraindication for penicillin therapy. It is contraindicated for this patient because he already suffered allergic reactions to the drug. So he would be at great risk should he take this drug again. It should not have been prescribed. Another option was contraindicated drug administered. So here we have the administration issues. Contraindicated drug administered was the other option. Do we know whether the patient finally took the drug? No, we don't, because it was not reported. We would add information assigning this term. It was not reported. And documented allergy to administered drug. This would be found under product monitoring errors. Here is the documented hypersensitivity to administered product. Here is a documented hypersensitivity or allergy to administered drug. With LLT contraindicated drug prescribed, we have captured the prescribing error. But one piece of information is not covered yet, the monitoring error by the physician. He didn't make sure that his patient was not known to be allergic to penicillin. He didn't ask him. And would this LLT now fit in order to capture this monitoring error? No, because we don't know whether the patient actually received the drug at the end. Here it contains the administration information. We only know that it was prescribed. And again, if you look at the concept descriptions, documented hypersensitivity to administered drug. This medication error refers to the situation when a patient is administered a drug that is documented in the patient's medical file to cause a hypersensitivity reaction in the patient. So it relates to administration, and this is not suitable for our verbatim, for our case. We don't know whether the patient finally received this medication. So that's why we have to look for a more vague term under the product monitoring errors. And here we have product monitoring error. So here a more vague term, medication monitoring error. Here it is. Let me switch back. And here the final proposals. We would go for the medication monitoring error under product monitoring error and LLT contraindicated drug prescribed, not same PT, contraindicated product prescribed would be the PT here. And the penicillin allergy would of course have to be documented in the medical history for the medical history of the patient. Are there any comments or questions, Jane?
No, there's no, Caroline, there's no comments or questions on this one. So, oh, hold on, just coming now. If appropriate, can we code the wrong dose and then circumstance or information capable of leading to medication error at the same time? What do you think about that one? That's just arrived.
No, there's clear guidance in this regard. If you have a circumstance or information that may lead to a medication error, then you would of course need to capture the root cause for that. Like drug name look-alike or sound alike or packaging look-alike, whatsoever. So there's always a root cause that is reported under these circumstances. And you wouldn't code any more specific wrong dose or wrong patient whatsoever, because no error or issue occurred yet. It's just a circumstance that is reported that could lead to a medication error. Therefore, it's not suitable to code to an LLT that really conveys a medication error. I hope I could answer your question.
Thank you, Caroline. Yeah. I think because this one here, the error's actually happened, hasn't it? It's not a
it's not a circumstance. Here something happened because the doctor prescribed a contraindicated medication. He didn't ask the patient if the patient was allergic to penicillin and prescribed the penicillin, although the patient had suffered allergic reactions in his history. It was documented.
Perfect, thank you. Nothing more so far?
So then just the last one, shortly, in order to capture all our verbatim. Infused in 1 hour instead of 3 as prescribed due to malfunction of the infusion pump. The usual questions. Here we have a root cause that needs to be captured. The last one again is not relevant here. And your part again. Infused in 1 hour instead of 3 as prescribed due to malfunction of the infusion pump. Drug administration error and wrong rate. Drug administration rate too fast. Accidental overdose. Pump infusion issue. Pump over infusion. Device over infusion. So which LLT or which LLTs would you assign here? Again, we have a chain of events. It's obvious that we need to split code. First, we have the malfunction, and then the malfunction leads to the fact that the infusion was administered in 1 hour instead of 3. Let us look. Drug administration rate too fast is the preferred option, and pump infusion issue. Others vote for pump over infusion. So let me close the poll here to not overrun time too much. And we will again use our decision chart. So here there was a malfunction of the infusion pump. So this was nothing that was under the control of the nurse or physician. So this was something that happened accidentally, and all consequences are also considered accidental then. So it was triggered not by the nurse. She has done nothing wrong. She or a physician installed the pump, but did nothing wrong. There was an unexpected malfunction of the pump, meaning that the incident occurred accidentally. And it also occurred in the context of therapeutic use of the product, so it is to be considered a medication error. And why can we say that the fast infusion rate happened accidentally? The companion document clearly states that situations such as product quality or product supply issues are outside of one's control and therefore usually not classified as medication errors, but that they can subsequently lead to medication errors. So the malfunction itself is not to be considered a medication error. It's just it's nothing that was caused by the nurse or the physician, but the resulting incidents, they can be considered medication errors. And further down, we are provided with an example that is comparable to our scenario. Syringe plunger couldn't be completely pushed down, so the patient received only half of a scheduled dose. It is to be considered a medication error consequent to a delivery device issue, and we are asked to code to LLT device delivery system malfunction, and then to the consequence, incorrect dose administered by device. So just shortly, here again, what needs to be, we have the pump and infusion, and if we enter this information, we get hits to over-infusion, under-infusion. Let us look for the over-infusion. Here we are. It's grouped under device infusion issue. We were asked that the infusion was administered too fast, in 1 hour instead of 3. So it was an over-infusion. This would be the most specific LLT that we can select in order to reflect what has been reported here. Device infusion issue would be too vague. So we always try to code as specifically as possible. We will then have to capture the resulting administration error. Do we need to split code and assign wrong rate and drug administration error? So we have, of course, I've shown you earlier, the wrong rate. An LLT for that, here it is. Go to browser. Here we have the wrong rate. And we have, of course, a drug administration error. Under product administration error, here it is. Drug administration error. But we don't have to split in this instance because we can find a perfect combination term that is drug administration rate too fast. Here it is. So this perfectly captures what has been reported in our case. Drug administration rate too fast. So the drug was administered and it was administered too fast. Another option in the poll was accidental overdose. Would this LLT be more appropriate than LLT drug administration rate too fast? This then now again depends on your internal processes and the suspect drug. If you have access to the case information and know the drug and its dose range, you may be able to classify the event as overdose in case of a narrow therapeutic index. For example, when knowing it is a cardiac glycoside, for instance. But when coding out of context with the information we can see in the verbatim, coding to accidental overdose would not be suitable. So here we are. You may now argue that LLT administration rate, drug administration rate too fast, does not contain the information that this happened accidentally. The companion document also provides clarity here. It says under this section here that we should avoid double coding the same error, meaning that we should not use multiple LLTs to capture a singular error that is reported with both a general and a specific verbatim. We should only code the specific error. And the example given is the following. If it is reported that there was an administration error and that the wrong drug was administered, select only LLT wrong drug administered for the specific error. Do not use an additional drug administration error for the general description because this would not add any meaningful information, even though the two LLTs are linked to different PTs. And in the section for administration errors and issues, we find a corresponding example. If a patient accidentally took 1 tablet twice daily instead of the prescribed 1 tablet once daily, we should only code the LLT once daily dose taken more frequently. And the argument is that it is more important to select a specific LLT for the reported scenario, although the LLT does not capture that it was accidental. It falls under the HLT product administration errors and issues, and this is obviously considered sufficient. And this is really very similar to the scenario in our example, and therefore we would not split into drug administration error and wrong rate, but only select one LLT, namely drug administration rate too fast. Oops. So here we are. We would capture the cause of the incident, the infusion pump malfunction, by assigning LLT pump overinfusion, and the subsequent administration error by assigning LLT drug administration rate too fast under PT incorrect drug administration rate. Any questions,
yes,
Jane?
We do. We have one question there, challenging. Why are we coding the overinfusion? Because the report isn't reporting the overinfusion. It's almost like we're adding that, is the comment that we've received there. But
if an IV drug is infused in 1 hour instead of 3, the whole dose, the whole infusion, then it's an overinfusion. It's more than per time period than was intended. So it's an overinfusion.
Yes, I agree. And they tell us that it's a malfunction, don't they, Caroline? So it's not.
Yes, it is a malfunction.
They told us the
it's a malfunction. Yeah.
So we know.
And this, of course, needs to be captured in order to capture the root cause for the error, for the subsequent administration error. This was not due to any error that was made by a nurse or whatsoever, but it was due to a malfunction of the infusion pump.
So Frank's given us a similar comment on this one. Interesting. Pump overinfusion implies that too much drug was administered, not that the correct dose was administered in a specified time. Does pump overinfusion mean too much, not just too quick?
Yeah, too much in a specified time period. So if you have a specified time period of 3 hours for the dose to be given, and you provide it in 1 hour, then it's 3/4 the dose that you are providing to the patient in this given 1 hour.
It's the pump itself for us overinfusing, isn't it? So
yeah.
Yes, I agree. If we're running late on time, so if anyone has questions, we'll follow up with you by email if you will have anything around that, if you want to continue the discussion.
Yeah. So here, the summary of what we did today. If you have questions, just let us know. We will address them via email with you. Here, the context of the MSSO, just shortly, also the training schedule, and MedDRA support documentation, where you find the companion document and the points to consider guidance for MedDRA term selection. Here under contact, you can find, if you click on it, you see this website opens, and this is I would like to show you this one. So here we are. If I click on contact and click on YouTube here, you will be brought to the MedDRA YouTube channel, and you will find all the recorded sessions also for the MedDRA coding of medication error workshops. Here, the complete playlist, also in different languages. So we provide the medication error training in different languages, in French, in Chinese, and also in Spanish. So here you find the different trainers. Also Jane is here. So if you did not attend other workshops, you have the options to review or to listen back to these workshops with these recorded sessions. And with this, I would like to ask you to, if you have the time, to maybe provide some feedback for this medication error workshop. We are always interested in your feedback, whether you found it useful, where we could improve content or the organization of these webinars. So always grateful to get your feedback here, and it's definitely considered. So I see that many of you are answering already. Thank you for that. It's only very short, so it should be done in just a few minutes. You can continue to respond to the questions in the survey, and I will forward to the last slide. So thank you all for joining today, and a big thank you also to you, Jane, as always, for your support. And enjoy the rest of your day wherever you are across the world. And because we have December already, December is already approaching, so to say, have a nice pre-Christmas season and happy holidays as well. Goodbye for now. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you, Caroline. Bye-bye.